About 30 people registered and I'm showing 16 participants. So 2 more minutes if everyone's willing to be patient.
And I just wanted to say that we're also live on Facebook and going to be recording this webinar. So for the most part, we'll have, the speakers with their presentation up. But if for any reason you are uncomfortable with being, on camera, on video, on Facebook, or in a recording, feel free to turn your camera off. Otherwise, feel free to leave it on. And maybe if folks, I'm interested to see if you want to put in the chat where you're zooming in from.
Sunbasket?
Yep, I'm on this Zoom thing.
Does anyone need a little orientation? Does anyone need to know how you find the chat or how you mute or unmute yourself?
I see chat down there. Just click on it, I'm imagining.
Click on that and the panel will appear on the right.
Okay,
And
there
right
it
now-
is.
Yeah. All right, Ross, all the way from Atlanta. Well, from here, from Atlanta.
If you have a question, do you type it in the chat column and then what do? Send it, or does it go automatically?
Good question, Mr. Hodges. There's 2 ways you can ask a question, or if you have a, let me think. Yep, you're gonna want to type a question into that chat and then just hit send, and make sure it's. Well, you can choose whether you want to direct the question to the whole group or just to me or an individual.
And I'll do my best to try and answer any questions that I can in the chat during the course of the webinar, but I'll be looking for some to save for our Q&A session if we have time at the end. And if for whatever reason we can't answer it, I'll let you know via email, and we'll be sure to follow up with you if you have any more specific questions.
Where exactly is the send button, which is a stupid question, but
The what?
You just
where
press
exactly
return.
is
Press
it's
return
not-
on your computer.
Yeah, you hit
it's on
enter.
the keyboard?
Yep.
Enter, yeah,
Enter.
right?
Yep. Enter or return. You
What do you
just,
think, Will? We ready?
yeah. Should we start? Well, thank you all so much for joining us. This is exciting. I'm excited. We've got somewhat of a powerhouse of panelists here to share what they know. Real quickly again, I know most of you are probably familiar with Zoom etiquette, but if you can keep yourself muted, we can cut down all the background noise and make this seamless and make it easy for all of us to hear. Let me see. We expect, I mean, this was planned to go for an hour and 15 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on if there's interest in question and answers at the end. If you need to go early, if you need to drop off, that's fine. Just maybe let us all know in the chat, say that you have to go and thank us. And let me introduce our panelists. So with us here, we have Brett Fleischman, who's Assistant Director of Fossil Finance Campaigns for 350.org, which is our national umbrella. So he eats and sleeps this stuff all day long. And we have Barbara Donakai here, who's a board member of 350 Colorado and was intimately involved in the successful campaign in 2018, although it took about 2 years, I think she's going to tell us, to divest Denver, to divest $180 million from Denver's general fund that it had invested in Exxon and Chevron stocks. And a colleague of hers, Dan Carreno, is with us as well. And let me remember where Dan is from. Dan is Executive Vice President of Business Development Change Finance at PBC. So he's got a little bit of a finance and investment background, which is going to be really useful for us. And so let me see, am I forgetting anything, Julia?
Maybe introduce yourself, Will.
Good point. I'm Will Hodges. I'm the team coordinator of 350 Roaring Fork. So I'm kind of leading up the charge with Fred here, running campaigns, trying to really grow our campaigns in the Roaring Fork Valley. And that's the reason you all are here. I'm hoping that we can enlist you all to help us divest municipal funds in this valley from fossil fuels. So Brett, I think I'll turn it over to you. Brett Fleischman with Assistant Director of Fossil Free Finance Campaigns at 350.org.
Thanks, Will. Thanks for having me on. Hi, everybody. I'm Brett, and I'm with you all. I grew up in Colorado, and then left after high school, as people from the small town of Vail do sometimes. And after grad school, when 350.org and Bill McKibben launched the Do the Math tour and the beginning of the divestment movement as we know it, that was back when 350.org had like 50 full-time employees in Oakland, California. And they started getting a lot of emails from the finance community, actors and bankers saying, we want to get ahead of this. Divestment movements often generate money moving around. Can we talk to you? And all the activists were like, we don't want to talk to finance people. I just got a message that my internet is unstable, so let me know if I need to like turn off my video or something. And that's when I walked in the door, and they were like, we need somebody with some finance background, and here's a bunch of emails to respond to. And that was back in 2012 when I started working for 350. Now 350.org is an organization of, I don't know, maybe 170 employees. We work with campaigns in maybe 10 countries, and we have staff in about 22 countries. And we are running finance campaigns almost everywhere. That's sort of where the organization is going. So in Japan, we're targeting the 3 largest banks on their coal finance. In South Africa, we're targeting the South African Development Bank for its coal financing. In Europe, we're targeting the European Central Bank as they're launching all this new money onto the market, trying to stop it from flowing to fossil fuel companies. And we continue our pension divestment work almost everywhere, and support for our friends doing on-campus school endowment and finance institution. So that's just a quick bit of background. I put up some slides. I'm going to share my screen, which means I won't be able to see questions come in. So maybe if you want to stop and clarify something, just come off mute and say, hold on, don't understand what you're saying. So hopefully you can see my screen now. I have this campaigners ridiculously short. How do I pop that up there? There. The campaigners ridiculously short guide to the world's financial system and finance campaigning. Go through 350 Colorado. And I'm also going to share a few links here. So maybe I kind of want that on the bottom if possible. Hopefully you can.
And while you're talking, Brett, I'll just say if anyone does have a question, you can hit escape, and you can go back to your old screen, and you can type a question in the chat, and then you can go back to Zoom. You can return to Zoom again, I encourage people to put questions in the chat box, and we will keep track of the questions and talk about them.
Cool. So this is sort of how is that in your way too? This is sort of how we look at the finance sector from our sort of like as a pillar of support for for fossil fuels. I guess we should say that divestment launched with asset owners. It's the folks who hold money and then they put it in the market, the pension systems, endowments, retail investors. That's you and me if you have enough money to put it in the market, high net worth individuals, folks like that. And asset owners, there's sort of like arrows flowing from asset owners to banks. You can put your money into a bank for a deposit. You can give it to an asset manager who will manage your money in the market, and then insurance, who also has money in the market. And those are the sort of 4 finance pillars that we're looking at to cut financial flows to fossil fuel companies and projects. Again, super simplified and quick. And actually, Will asked a really good question. I have here 185 trillion for asset owners. That's globally, and assets under management. And I'm going to get to the community who have committed to divestment in a little bit, and we'll talk about that number. So let me put a pin in that. How come I can't control this? Oh, there we go. So asset owners is sort of like classic divestment. We've been going to pension systems, calling for divestment. Somebody calculated the number of pensions globally who've committed to some sort of divestment back in 2018, and it was more than 144. And then insurance companies have also started to make announcements. This is almost all European insurance companies, but more than 30 with 10 trillion in assets under management, and sovereign wealth funds. Down here I have NGPF, and that's the largest sovereign wealth fund, at least as it's managed, is the Norwegian oil fund. Norway has a bunch of money that they collected over years of oil extraction and have done a good job sort of like managing it and making sure it's integrated into the social safety nets of the government. It's about $1 trillion, and they've started to divest their money from even oil companies. I think it's the Norwegian Global Pension Fund or something, NGPF. And I was going to go here. I have all of these in the slide deck as resources, so you'll have these web pages. But Go Fossil Free is a place where you collect this information, and we try to keep as up to date as we can the number of institutions who've committed to divestment. As of today, it's 1,244, and approximately 14.6 trillion of assets under management who have committed to divestment. So New York City is on that list, and they have $100 billion of assets under management. That's not $100 billion of fossil fuel investments. It's total. And so that pool is going fossil free, and that's what that $14 trillion represents, is the total assets under management. And on this page, you can, here are some like notable divestments. You can look at the list of institutions who have committed to divestment by type, by country, that kind of thing, by coal only, or fossil fuels, or full, whatever kind of divestment. So that sometimes that's a helpful resource if you're speaking to somebody who cares about how their peers are acting in the investor space. So cruising along, banks are oh Lord, banks are part of our work nowadays. At the moment, or since 2015, more than 34 globally significant banks have adopted at least coal restrictions. And the way that we're looking at how banks are moving money to fossil fuels are either for company loans or project loans. And company loans are much more prevalent these days than project loans. And we're working to push policies down or up a ladder, I guess we could say, from coal mining to coal power and projects to corporate finance, which is much more popular, and then from just loans and underwriting, and then go from coal often to tar sands and Arctic oil and gas to all fossil fuels. Coming out in September, is it September yet? Tomorrow, September? It's September 10th, I believe. There's an organization that's going to publish a policy tracker for banks and how they're making these announcements. It's called Reclaim Finance, and I'll make sure to pass that on to Will. If anybody wants to see like what policies look like at the bank level, there's lots of banks who have now carbon restrictive lending policies. And this organization, Reclaim Finance, is going to start grading them. We can see them. I was going to show you this webpage by IEFA, who's one of the Institute for Energy Economics and Finance Analysis. They've been doing a lot of data crunching for the divestment movement. They keep track of banks, asset owners, asset managers, central banks, development finance institutions. A similar list to what the Go Fossil Free website has, but it expands to banks, which is really helpful. Okay, and then talking quickly about insurance companies, this has been like a really powerful campaign, super strategic and surgical. As I said before, most of the announcements from insurance companies have come from Europe, but they're starting to migrate into Australia and the US, which is where the energy is flowing now. There's a sort of campaign headquarters for Insure Our Future and Unfriend Coal are the names of the campaigns. I think it's Insure Our Future here in the US. And someone who would be available to support a local campaign if you're interested. Here's there's lots of great resources on the Insure Our Future page, including toolkits on how to identify your city or town's insurance provider and how to launch a campaign and that kind of thing. And within the toolkit is the Boulder County resolution that passed at the city level. Here's what that looks like. And now Boulder has instructed its insurance procurement department to take climate change into account and look at if their insurance providers are underwriting fossil fuel projects and companies, which is very cool. Okay, here's those resources that you can just click on when I send this over to Will, who will post this hopefully somewhere. And then I had these slides up and then took them out, and Will said, put those back in. And they're just a bit of like evidence that we're kind of trying to track. So Goldman Sachs started looking in 2019, produced a report, started looking at like the number of divestments on the bar chart and then stock prices. And Royal Dutch Shell wasn't the first. Actually, I think it was a coal company. I want to say Glencore, but
Brett, will you hit present, and then that will blow that up and we can see it a little bit closer?
Yeah, keep having to like move.
Just briefly.
Loading. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to say Royal Dutch Shell was not the first fossil fuel company, but one of the first oil companies that mentioned divestment in their annual report as a material risk. So I think the second line there is the one I got most excited about. If this were to continue, it would have material adverse effects on the price of our securities and our ability to access equity in the capital markets. hell yeah, that's what we want to hear. So that's good. Here's a bit from some of the coal industry talking about their difficulty operating because of insurance companies walking away from coal. I was actually just talking about Exxaro today, who mines coal in South Africa. Talking about the cost of insuring mines is getting more expensive because of our carbon issue. Our carbon issue. CalPERS, the country's largest pension system, the state of California public employee pension system, announced they were sort of forced by the state legislature to divest from coal. And so they've been like dragging their feet. And this is back in 2015. And we just looked at their holdings, and they increased their holdings in Exxaro, who's still mining coal. And so we're trying to bang the drum on that and call them out for not doing their job. And then there's lots of really great finance graphs. This is the last thing I'm going to say. I feel like I've been rambling on here. Lots of great finance graphs, just like showing the market sort of doing what it does. And even today with like the big COVID dip and the market recovery, and then the energy sector really splitting off. And this is like in the last 6 years or so. But something happened recently where, as you may have seen, Exxon fell out of the Dow. It's been falling out of like the top 10 of the S&P 500 and those types of things. So this is back only a few days ago, August 27th. The energy sector became the smallest component of the S&P 500 for the first time in the history of the S&P 500. And this may seem like there's sort of like a lot to unpack here when we say its current weight now in the market out of all of the sectors is only less than 2.5%, down from 16 in June. Most investors for like a clean, diversified portfolio these days have between 3 and 5% of their portfolio invested in the energy sector. The energy is code for coal, oil, and gas. And the Federal Reserve, through the CARES Act, is now buying corporate bonds for the first time, and has bought about 7% of the energy sector as its diversification in its bond portfolio. Something that we're sort of like launching a divest the Fed campaign, fossil-free Fed campaign in the very near future. But that's just something to say that the financial case for divestment is quite strong, especially when you're talking to public money. We can get into that later. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and pass it on. Stop share.
Thank you, Brett. I don't see any questions right now in the chat. I'm going to hand things off to Dan, and he's going to talk about sort of common questions or common criticisms of the divestment movement.
But Will, do you think it would make more sense for Barbara to go through hers first? Because I feel like a lot of my comments kind of piggyback onto sort of the experience that we had working on the Denver campaign.
Barbara, how's that sound? You ready to go?
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Julia, were you gonna bring my slides up or somebody?
I can share your slides, Barbara.
Yeah, whoever. Yeah, it's a little hard for me to do both. I'm not very good at this. Not my favorite thing.
Thanks everyone for your patience here. I am going to share my screen with Barbara's slides. Barbara is going to talk about the successful campaign in Denver, how they were able to pull this off in Denver.
Okay, so can you scroll up? Yeah, scroll up to that. There you go. And then I think just run the slideshow. And it'll be full screen. Yeah, there you go. Great. Cool, thank you. My name's Barbara Donakai. I work with 350 Denver, and I'm on the board of 350 Colorado. I also work with Physicians for Social Responsibility. So I'm gonna, if you can go down to the first one after that.
Yep.
So this is our timeline. We started, as you can see, in January 2017 with the idea that somebody brought up at a 350 Denver meeting. And we ended in March 2019 when the mayor declared he was divesting at a Mayoral Forum. So in the interim, we had long periods of time when nothing happened. We had times when when the co-leads on this left for one reason or another. And we learned things that changed our direction. So I'll cover this in more detail as we go along. So hit the next one.
And Barbara, it might actually be useful too if you just briefly point out to people how municipalities might be financing fossil fuels. I mean, you might get into that as well, but.
You mean in what manner
Yeah.
it would be? Well, I think Dan can probably, I kind of touch on that, but I think Dan can probably go into more detail about it. I do have a little detail about that.
Okay. Okay.
So these are the questions to ask yourself, like what are your goals? What's already been done and who's done it? What are the holdings in your municipality? Who has the power and influence to make decisions? And do you have enough people that are committed to follow through on this? And another question we got from council members was, what's bad about these companies? So it can be very basic. The next one. So we defined our goal very generally as funding projects that don't compromise the health of Denver's environment, communities, and economy, and that invest in projects that are profitable and ethical. And then from there, we came up with specific objectives. One of our objectives, which we thought we needed to do initially, was to lobby all city council members. Well, we didn't really need to do that. Next one. So this was the one something that was really a shock to us. We were looking at who had already done some work. So we started to connect with the Denver indigenous community, and they had already spoken at a city council meeting and brought up this issue. So this is a wording from an email that the mayor's office sent to the Four Winds American Indian Center that the JP Morgan had nothing to do with financing the pipeline. So we were kind of stunned because that made us realize this is where we're starting from. There's like this level of denial that they're even involved. So you can go on to the next one. So that prompted us to go into a very deep detail about what actually the relationship was. So we found that Rainforest Action Network had information on it, but mostly we found someone whose name I can't remember, unfortunately, at Food and Water Watch, who was a researcher who was doing research on this very intently, and he was able to give us a whole very complicated description of how Chase is actually connected to Dakota Access Pipeline. And it wasn't that simple, but it was important to know that going forward. And other people you might not have to do that. You might have, people know more now than they did then. So go ahead, next one. So developing the proposal, we developed a pretty specific ordinance, like 2 pages. And that link there, if anybody wants to use this slideshow, they're welcome to. And if you go to that link there, you can see our whole ordinance proposal that we put together. And that was, we were proposing an ordinance and not a resolution. An ordinance becomes law, it's binding, it's harder to change. We were asking for a change in the actual charter of the city to include that along with issues like not investing in terrorist organizations. So that was what initially we wanted to have. And when we were putting this together, we used the city's own wording around the mayor signing the mayor's climate agreement. So we were using their own words in terms of why we should be doing this. So, okay, you can go on. So here's where we get to, Will. You have to find out where your municipality's money is. And in Denver, they publish a quarterly online update on a website called Transparent Denver. And they publish quarterly reviews of how much money they have in corporate holdings. And in 2017, the corporate holdings were Chevron, Exxon, Mobil, and Chase were in the top 5. When we got to get deeper than that, we had to actually dig a little deeper and request from the city a list of all the investments that the city had. So, and ours were, and Dan can talk about that. They're not actually investments. That's something we learned early on. They're commercial paper. City's not actually allowed to invest. So every municipality, I think they're probably all going to be similar, that this is going to have to be information that's available to the public. And
Can you explain the difference between commercial paper and investment?
well, I'm going to let Dan do that.
Okay.
Okay. So anyway, you can go to the next one. So a really important thing was to meet with decision makers. So you want to assess if you have enough people, you have people to do that. What we ended up doing was, over the course of a year, at rallies, at online seminars, whatever meetings, we got people from Denver to sign up that were willing to lobby their council district. And I'm just kind of emphasizing that if at that point it was me and Ryan Denham, if Ryan Denham and I went and visited with all the city council members and said, we want to do this, it wouldn't have that much impact. We had to get people from every one of those council districts to meet with their constituents. And that was a really super important thing to remember. You can do the next one. So between May 2018 and January 2019, we met with key people in the city council. We also realized we didn't have to meet with everyone in the city council. We didn't have to convince Karen Black that they should divest from fossil fuel when we know she likes fracking. So we met with the key people. So we met with Jolan Clark, who was a city council president. He told us that we were going to meet with the city's chief financial officer, and he informed us the chief financial officer doesn't really have any power. So this is like who has power. So he said who has power is it's the city's financial advisor group, and they were they give recommendations to the CFO. The CFO checks it with the mayor, then the CFO carries it out. He also told us that they could do a council referred ballot initiative so people could vote on it if they had a majority of city council members in support, or we could run our own ballot initiative. And at that point, we just really didn't have the bandwidth to even think about doing that. So then our next significant meeting was with Rafael Espinosa. And he's the liaison between the Denver City Council and the financial advisors, Chandler and Associates. And that was where Dan joined us. And I got to say, having someone like Dan on your team is huge. We met with Rafael was trying to learn the ropes around the finances of the city of Denver, and he was kind of boggled by it himself. And he had questions, and Dan answered those questions. Like it was just really quite amazing. And we would have been sitting there saying, well, I don't know. Well, we'll find out. Well, maybe. So having someone who really knows, can speak the language, I guess it's that having someone that can speak the finance language was incredibly valuable. Our last meeting, city council meeting, was with Albus Brooks, and he suggested that we contact Jerry Tiniano, who's the head of the mayor's office of sustainability. And Dan and I met with Jerry. It was a really good meeting. We discussed a lot of things, and one of the things that we discussed was that we had a survey out that put forth the issue of divestment to all the candidates, whether they supported it, whether they supported the Green New Deal, and that we were also planning a mayoral sustainability forum where the candidates for mayor would be asked that same question. So you can go on to the next slide. So this was our question we put in our survey. Do you support, and I won't read it to you. You can read it, but basically, do you support divesting from fossil fuel? And we had, let's see, we couldn't endorse candidates. So this is what we came up with. In 350 Colorado, especially Deb McNamara was incredibly helpful in putting this together. We couldn't endorse candidates, but we could ask them a question, and then we put their survey their responses up on our website. 19 candidates formally endorsed divestment, and 4 candidates, including the current mayor, issued a statement without a formal endorsement, but sort of wishy-washy. So, and then subsequently at the same time, we were working with the Alliance Center, which is it's a center in Denver that's sustainable and houses about 20 different environmental organizations. So we worked with them and some other groups on putting together a forum, Mayoral Forum, where one of the questions was asked about many issues of sustainability, but our question was about divestment. So you can go to the last one, or next to last. So this was our Mayoral Forum. It was well attended. It was live streamed. Is that what it was? Live streamed. That's the Mayor Hancock on the far right, and that's Lisa Calderon on the far left, who was one of the candidates opposing him. All of the mayoral candidates that you see there supported our divestment proposition. They were all in favor of divestment. The mayor hadn't committed, but at this meeting, he, and I think it's because our meeting with Jerry, we had given him the mayor had a heads up that this was coming as a question. And he at that stated that that the city was already getting rid of its investments with ExxonMobil and Chevron. So that was our moment of almost victory. So you can go to the last slide, Will. So this was some of the takeaways. Is the timing was really right for us. There was a lot of awareness because of Standing Rock. There was a lot of movement on the part of many groups calling for divestment globally, statewide, locally. The elections for mayor and the city council, everybody was up for election except one seat. And Denver had this most progressive mayoral and council candidates that we have ever seen. So it was, the timing was really good for this. So we didn't get all of what we asked for. We didn't get an ordinance passed. We didn't get the city to change the charter. We didn't get the city to divest from Chase or Wells Fargo. Jerry Tiniano from the Sustainability Office basically said, don't even bother going there. I can go into more detail about that, but the city's not going to do that. We decided early on that we weren't going to try to get the city to change its actual contract with for banking services. We weren't going to even try to do that. So it wasn't a total success, but I guess the lesson in that is ask for more than you want to get. And the other important message is make sure you have a team and you're ready to follow through, because it might take a while. Changes come up. So that's it. And I'll turn it to Dan.
Thank you, Barbara.
All right. So it sounds like maybe the first thing that we should talk about is kind of the mechanics of how a municipality may finance fossil fuels. Does that sound like a good place to start, since that's come up a couple of times? And please, by all means, if I start getting too geeky on the financial terms, stop me and ask questions. But let me also preface by saying that the finances of municipalities, towns, and cities are not the typical type of investment portfolio that I deal with in my career, so I'm not that intimately familiar with them. A portfolio like a pension fund, like PARA, is something that's far more, familiar to me, so I can speak to that a lot easier. But what I learned from the Denver divestment campaign is that the city had funds that were largely frictional, right? Tax revenue that was coming in that needed to be allocated to different sources. And in the meantime, they wanted to maximize whatever return they could get on those assets. And that largely involved investing in commercial paper. And I thought that there were a bunch of short-term corporate bonds in there as well. Barbara, you can correct me if my memory is failing me here. But the difference there would be, corporate bond obviously is a debt instrument that any company is going to issue in order to get funds so that they can finance their operations. Very important to energy companies, fossil fuel companies whose business is very capital intensive. And then commercial paper is a similar type of debt instruments, just far shorter term, and it's what we call a rolling debt instrument. It's usually every 7 to 14 days. It's basically a very short term. Think of it as like a CD, right? They'll issue these debt instruments, commercial paper. Folks like the city of Denver will buy it, knowing that okay, we're going to get a 0.4% return over the next 7 days. If we don't need the money, we can just roll it back into that commercial paper, and if we do need the money, we can get it back at that time. So one way or another, these are all just ways that fossil fuel companies use to raise money in order to, finance their operations, which, as I mentioned before, are very, very capital intensive. So there's a lot going on there. Let me take a pause and see if that is clear. Did that make sense to everybody? Can I elaborate on any particular point?
And it's their general fund that sometimes will hold these bonds.
Barbara, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was my understanding. Was that the name of the account was the general fund, right? Yeah.
Commercial paper is held by banks.
It could be held really by anybody. So think of it just like a bond, right? So anybody could really go out there and
Put
buy
it together.
that. Yeah, anybody can buy the commercial paper, and really any kind of company could really issue commercial paper. Again, just like a bond. Really, the difference between a bond and commercial paper is kind of the how short-term commercial paper is. It's almost more like a very short-term CD, like a money market account, something like that. It's very liquid, considered to be very safe. And this is where, in my opinion, it's actually much easier to get an organization like a town or municipality that's dealing in these types of securities to divest versus trying to get somebody like Para to divest. That is a much, much trickier animal. Because, frankly, what we're talking about are just, any type of financial instrument that can provide the city a safe place to park its money for a short period of time and provide some degree of financial return. And there's just lots and lots and lots of different options. So for a financial manager, it's easy just to say, okay, if it makes sense, if we're getting this ask from our citizens, we can easily just get out of the commercial paper that's funding Exxon or Chevron and invest in commercial paper from another company that's not doing the same level of damage to the environment, to society, and that's not getting the same level of bad press, really, at the end of the day, right? So that's why I think it was much easier to get the city of Denver to move on this versus trying to get, again, an account like Para to do it.
Jason has a question either for you, Dan, or Barbara about the percentage. What was the percentage of Denver's commercial paper in Exxon and Chevron in their overall budget?
Do you remember that, Dan?
I don't remember the exact number, but it was pretty small. As a percentage of the overall portfolio, yeah, it was
Right.
not a significant amount. And again, that kind of made it easier.
I think all of the corporate investments and all the investments, most of them were like Freddie Mays and or Freddie Macs and different kinds of other kinds of investment, like agency investment. They had money invested with the Tennessee Valley Authority or in that. So the corporate investments, I think all told were 15%.
Yep. And then the fossil fuel companies representing the portion of that was even relatively small.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and as to Brett's comments before, the energy sector, the fossil fuel sector is just not what it was 25, 30 years ago. It is a much smaller portion of the overall capital markets. So as time has gone on here, whether it be a stock portfolio or a bond portfolio or commercial paper, everybody's allocation to fossil fuel companies has been going down just because the industry has been shrinking. So that's where I always say that, well, you know, the market is eventually going to divest all of us, right? We're eventually going to get there one way or another. The question is, you know, you as the city of Denver or the, you know, Roaring Fork Valley or an individual investor or para, you know, do you want to ride that investment as it goes all the way down and get bad press because you made that bad decision? Or would you rather be somewhat forward thinking in your management of these assets and divest now, receive some good press because of it, and theoretically, you know, avoid the downside that we all see coming?
You know, and another thing I wanted to point out, like the things we had going in our favor at this point, at that point, was all this press about Standing Rock. I mean, Dakota Access Pipeline was like reviled by most people. So we had that going for us. The city would have a hard time saying, it's like, yeah, no, we want to keep investing it. Well, they did keep investing in the bank, but and the other thing is, you know, the elections were coming up. So seeing where things are in terms of elections and where the incumbents are, like the incumbents in this past Denver election were all very progressive. So if you didn't get on the bandwagon, you weren't going to get the vote. So, you know, you can really capitalize on elections. And so I think the question now is like, what does divestment look like in the era of COVID? And with a lot of the companies going bankrupt, I think, not a good time for them. So in some ways, it would be kind of irresponsible to not get out of that. But I think making the case for the banks is it's a harder one.
The banks are generally pretty tough, right? Because again, you know, very, very capital intensive business, fossil fuel extraction. They need capital from every source, which is why they issue bonds, they issue commercial paper, they take loans from banks. So if you say, hey, we don't want you to invest in any bank that's financing fossil fuels, it's going to be tough for them to find a bank that's not, right? And it's a much, much bigger ask to say, don't invest in any banks or, you know, basically the financial sector as a whole. That is where you're probably going to run into kind of a brick wall just from an investment standpoint. Whereas again, the fossil fuel ask, I think is far more sort of accepted at this point. You know, the big difference between 2018 when we were having these meetings and now is that even just in that 2-year period of time, I think it's become far more accepted within the financial community that this makes sense to do. You even now have, you know, the largest asset manager in the world, BlackRock, managing, you know, trillions of dollars, saying, okay, we're now divesting from coal. They haven't gone as far to divest from oil and gas just yet, but, you know, BlackRock is far from a progressive organization. And when they start moving in this direction, you know that it's really being embraced by, you know, essentially the rest of Wall Street and the investment community.
And there's another, I mean, the other half of the value of these campaigns is symbolic, right? And it's keeping it in the headlines, the fact that, hey, our cities are holding bonds in these companies, or they're holding bonds in these banks that are still financing these projects that are just making the problem worse. And it just keeps it in the conversation, right? And half of it is these banks are really sensitive to public image.
Yeah, so if anybody's been tracking what's going on with Anwar in Alaska, not every one of them, but most of the large financial institutions out there have said we will not finance the extractive industries that are going into Anwar because they don't want the negative PR. And that's where, again, yeah, I think these types of campaigns are just so incredibly important because these financial institutions say, well, you know, number one, it's not that profitable for us to actually make those loans and those investments anymore because the industry is kind of dying off. So why are we going to take that additional risk in our overall portfolio and get the bad press at the same time? You know, divestment in some ways, we're not there yet, but it's starting to be almost become the path of least resistance for some organizations.
So I'm gonna, there's two more questions from people, and then I'm gonna go on to our fourth section, and then we can continue with the discussion. Maybe Denise is wondering about special districts, like fire districts, library districts, wastewater districts, schools. Do they figure into this? Do any of the three of you know?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have any experience with that, so I can't comment.
You know, a long time ago, there was a water utility in Santa Clara that divested, and the BART, the subway in San Francisco, had a resolution for divestment. Those are like the closest things that I can think of, but we sort of work more with large institutional investors more than, I guess, districts.
From what I've seen in Aspen, and I'm no authority, but their general fund is their largest fund, but it's still only about a quarter of their entire budget. And they have a bunch of other funds, roads and bridges, public safety, public health. They've got all kinds of smaller funds, but in each of those funds, I also saw pooled investment income. So I think it's even smaller, but I think a city and a county can have a little bit of all of their funds invested in these bonds.
And maybe I just want to like follow the thread that you're talking about, Will, and something that Dan just mentioned, that we sort of just said that the market is showing that folks who have been holding fossil fuels in their portfolio for 5 or 10 years, that value is shrinking on its own. And whether you want to like ride that to organic divestment, actually had a pension fund use that term, an organic divestment, just seems like kind of ridiculous. But I feel like we're like building a case that it's like not a big deal, especially if you're a small town who doesn't have a lot in the market. But sending a signal from your town, and this is hopefully a persistent signal that's coming from lots of public entities across the nation, to institutions that are enabling fossil fuel production, even if they're filing for bankruptcy, to Barbara's point, they're filing for bankruptcy, restructuring, and continuing along. So the carbon is still being put in the atmosphere, and that's what we care about most. So we want to signal to the insurance companies, because you can't build a new coal plant without insurance. And so that's one of the pins that we can pull to blow up a whole project from happening. To the banks that are providing corporate loans, because Dan keeps saying the industry is extremely capital intensive. And so if banks are like, listen, it's just not worth it for us to continue to loan money to this sector, we're going to like turn up the interest rates or something, and we make it harder for them to collect capital. And that happens because Aspen and Boulder and a bunch of towns and cities start saying, we are banking with you, Chase, because we have no other option, but we want you to stop this fossil fuel business. And they start hearing that a lot, that like, hey, it's a bigger customer base, and the calculation just doesn't make sense for them to keep going with these corporate loans. That's where we're going at, and that's sort of the theory of change. And to Will's point, that the institutional investors of the world making these big announcements that say, you know, we could have made gains or modest gains, but it's not the future that we want to invest in. That's the big symbolic ask. We're trying to create political space for restrictive legislation to step in. But the Trump administration sort of smashed that opportunity for us for 4 years, and that's all going to change in November, right? But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to just talk about the mechanics of how this works, what I think is really important, Brett, is that, you know, no one town or municipality, of course, is going to have, you know, a huge impact in and of itself. It's a community, right? We get enough people all doing this together. And what it eventually does, to Brett's slides that we saw before, is that it depresses the market valuation of the company overall. When that market valuation gets depressed, their stock price, the price for them to borrow money goes up. It means if they issue bonds, they have to issue those bonds at a higher interest rate. And when you are working in an industry where the margins have become razor thin and highly unpredictable because of the commodity prices, just a small increase in what it costs them to borrow could be the difference between, Peabody Energy being a viable business or declaring bankruptcy. So it really, really does make a big difference at the end of the day. And we're seeing this actually play out right now in real time in Appalachia and a lot of fracking operations that are occurring there. Because of this sort of increased risk profile and the fact that a lot of these companies are on really shaky financial ground, a lot of the big banks have said, we're not sure we're going to lend you money in the same way that we have in the past. Maybe your interest rate is now going to be higher and things of that nature. And as a result, some large asset owners, right? When I say asset owners, the large fossil fuel companies that own the assets under the ground, right? The oil and gas deposits have said, well, if it's going to cost us that much money to actually get the energy out of the ground, and we think we are only going to be able to sell it for this much in the future, it just doesn't make sense for us actually to do this at all. So you know what? We're just going to write it off. We're going to write it off of our balance sheet. And if you've ever heard the term stranded assets, that's exactly what it is. And it is happening in real time. And that is, what we need, right? Is to keep those assets in the ground in order not to exceed our carbon budget.
Can I just add something to that, Will, too? Yeah, something that I think was really important for me as I was learning about divestment is thinking about this kind of like circular thing, right? So even though in the Roaring Fork Valley, we may not have, 50,000 fracking wells like the Front Range does, our cities, by banking with like JP Morgan Chase and Wells Fargo, are financing fossil fuel projects and directly investing them into fossil fuel projects that are being drilled in Paonia and Greeley, all over Colorado, and contributing to the climate crisis. So even if it's not showing up in our town, or if it is, we do not want our cities financing this sort of climate crisis, these sort of polluting fossil fuel infrastructure that's impacting so many people. And I'm just going to drop a shocking number into the chat because we did some research earlier this year just to see like how much big banks have invested in oil and gas companies who drill in Colorado in the last 4 years. And it's a lot. So when we think about like this global movement signaling at Chase and Wells Fargo, both of which are banks that cities in the Roaring Fork Valley bank with, or our investments, when we think about this larger movement, we're protecting other people in Colorado and our neighbors from having these fossil fuel fracking projects built in the first place. So we're looking at this like total attack on the industry, right? And if we cut off that money pipeline of the capital that they need to build this new infrastructure, which they need, they cannot do this without this money, we're protecting ourselves and our future from having to live next to a fracking well. So it's a big number.
Thanks, Julie.
I have one more comment. It'll be brief. I looked into Chase, JP Morgan Chase Bank, about all the things that all the black spots on their record. It's not just oil and gas. And I have a document that sort of details about like 15 or 20 lawsuits that were launched or in a process or against Chase for things like predatory lending and repossessing homes of people that were fighting in Iraq. The US government was suing them on 2 points. So it goes beyond just oil and gas. They're bad. They're not a good corporate, whatever they would call, I don't know, it must be a name for good corporations. That's all.
Well, just to draw a line there as well. So, I mean, Chase was the bank that got more bad press over Standing Rock than any other bank, right?
Yeah.
And that, in addition to all the other, things that Barbara just referenced, it damages their brand, right? And brand damaging reduces the market value of the company. CEOs know this, so turn around a couple of years later, and Chase was actually one of the first banks to say, you know what, we're not going to finance fossil fuel extraction in Anwar. So, these types of campaigns and sort of screaming from the mountaintops that, this company is doing this and this company is doing that really does have an impact on their actions at the end of the day.
Let me see if there's other questions. I was going to add, I saw an article in the New York Times yesterday about the big oil is in trouble. The headline was big oil is in trouble. And the chemical lobby is lobbying US trade representatives right now to get Kenya, the country of Kenya, to force Kenya to take more of the world's plastic waste. And that's because the fossil fuel industry right now is banking now on their ability to manufacture more plastic. That's because they see their profits shrinking and shrinking and shrinking just over the next 50 years. And so they're banking on the world being able to produce more single-use disposable plastic that can then litter the third world. Let me see if there are other questions. Denise is wondering if divestment's been discussed with Colorado Communities for Climate Action. We should look into that, Denise. That's a group of towns and cities in Colorado that are sort of in favor of more climate action. I have a feeling that they might feel it's sort of touchy, but we should bring it up with them. Fred's wondering if the CEO from Chase was a former ExxonMobil employee. But Brett answered that. So I have 2 slides if people are willing to hang in here, and then we can discuss this more. But what this would look like here in the Roaring Fork Valley. Oh, let me share my screen here too. Can people see my screen?
Mhm.
Yep.
So it's a little bit of a review of Barbara's section, but this is sort of the order, the steps. We've got to first get clear on what we're really after. The clearer we are, the more effective we're going to be at following it. And then the second stage is outreach to officials. We contact city council people, we contact town trustees, the mayor, and we just gauge where they're at on this issue. It's really important, I think, to find public officials that are on your side. And there's going to be many public officials that are probably concerned to know that they have investments. Begin building relationships with public officials. Third step is research, which you ask for the info from the towns and cities, but then there's all kinds of resources from other 350 groups, other 350 campaigns, other environmental and human rights groups have already done a lot of homework on where banks are and where their money is. And fourth step is assigning tasks and making a plan. And what this is going to look like in this valley is we're going to need mini teams at each of the municipalities up and down the valley, because it's harder for, say, residents of Glenwood Springs to really be telling the city of Aspen that they need to pass a resolution. So we're going to need people in Aspen and people in Pitkin County working up there, and we're going to need people in Glenwood Springs and in Garfield County working down here. And then it sounded like the majority of Barbara's campaign, or the Denver campaign, was just communication with officials and scheduling meetings and preparing for your meetings and a lot of emails. And the last step is building public support, which is going to flow onto my next slide here. These are the kinds of things that, unless we get a city council that's, maybe they want to pass this. Maybe it doesn't take a whole lot of pressure. But in the event that it does take some persuasion, we can attend public meetings. We can sponsor petitions, letter writing campaigns, phone calling campaigns. The media is key, and I've already begun talking to several reporters that are interested in this story, and they want to know kind of what we find out about it. But also reporters can be great people who know how to dig up information. So once you get some intrepid reporters wanting to do an investigative piece, they can then find out a lot of things. Op-eds, letters to the editor. And then we got to think about how to do some creative online events. Yeah, that's all I had. Maybe I will open it up to see if there are any more questions.
It looks like Brian asked a question and he said, how do you make the case for focusing on divestment when COVID is consuming a lot of attention and bandwidth for officials and the community? So yeah, one thing I think, Dan, it would be great if you, when we talked before, you kind of outlined some of the great arguments that you used for city officials about why this is important right now and why it's valuable. So maybe you can answer that one.
Yeah, I mean, I do think right now it is tough, right? I mean, people are dealing with a number of crises that are out there, which is why, to Barbara's point, I think you have to be prepared to be patient and be in this kind of for the long haul. It's not a 2-month campaign in all likelihood. But I think the lesson, right, that we can take away from COVID is that, lack of preparation and lack of addressing issues that scientists have been telling us were a problem for a very, very long time have blown up in our face. And now we're dealing with this crisis that's much more difficult to get our arms around. And, I would come at it from the angle as, hey, as a constituent of yours, I would like to see our local government not make the same mistake twice. Our scientists have been screaming from the hilltops that we're going to have a massive issue, and we already have a massive issue because of the climate crisis. So, we'd like to see you start doing more to be proactive on this issue, and divestment is one way to do that, right? So, and then the other thing that we did discuss the other day, which I think is perhaps helpful once you get into the nitty gritty of sitting down in some of these meetings, but most of the investment advisors that may be working on any of these portfolios, their goal and their fiduciary duty, right? They're bound by law to do what they consider to do to maximize return for the portfolio. And that's what motivates them at the end of the day. So I think number one, it's always helpful to speak to them in that language and come at it and talk to them about the financial case for divestment. And also make sure that they realize that, the investment portfolio is, really for the benefit of the citizens overall. And, it's not, at least it has not been the case in recent years that investing in fossil fuels gets you a better return than anything else. In fact, it's been getting you a worse return. But even if that were the case, it's worth keeping in mind that there are these things that we call environmental externalities, right? So, maybe you're getting us a slightly better return on our city's money, but the cost for that is that everybody is a little worse off, right? We're dealing with wildfires, we're dealing with air pollution, we're dealing with all these things that reduce the well-being and kind of the wealth of the community overall. So if you're really doing your job as a fiduciary, you should be taking all of these things into consideration. It's not worth maximizing return in the investment portfolio if you're actually diminishing the livelihood and the well-being of your constituents. And I think it's, kind of worth tying those things together. I threw out a lot of jargon there. I apologize. It's the world I live in. So if I'm not making sense, please, by all means, let me, or tell me to clarify.
Brett, do you want to add to that? Because I know that you're working with the city of Boulder on thinking through some of these things right now.
Sorry, I was just trying to find the point of departure. What was the original question?
The original question was just around how do we get cities to care and work on this right now during COVID?
Right. Well, it's a really good question. I mean, I think that cities are not super singularly focused at the moment. Yes, there are major problems in cities because of COVID and funding, but from all of my conversations with small local governments, they're still operating, they still have all their departments, they're still like addressing multiple problems at once. And the climate is like on still a lot of cities' agendas. I just wouldn't discount cities to say like the only thing that they're doing is COVID related. And I think that there's a thread to sew between the two crises, and I think that's a powerful connection to be made, that like we don't want to exacerbate one crisis with another. Now is a really good time to be moving things. The energy sector is in a compounding crisis moment because of COVID and how they were performing before. This is a really good time to clean your books and to send signals to the big financial institutions that you're connected with, and to do something that feels good and positive. I think that, like local governments need that right now. They need a resolution and a bill that feels good, and there's a big lack of that. So I guess I want to say that try and see what happens.
Brian had a question earlier, like a lot earlier, about the involvement of the indigenous community in that Denver campaign. Barbara, do you want to talk more about, is Barbara still with us? Yeah, she's still with us. Were they just involved in the very beginning, or did you guys purposely engage them? And
What was that a question again?
the indigenous community in Denver.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, actually, there was so much going on around divestment, particularly around Chase, related to Standing Rock. And Micah was doing incredible organizing with the Native American community. And, there were weekly meetings at Four Winds American Indian Center. So we as an organization tried to participate in what they were doing. But we didn't actually bring them in. We didn't have any, actually, I know we issued an invitation for anybody to join us in our lobbying, but that wasn't necessarily their path for doing that. So we supported their efforts. I think they supported our efforts. But the letter from the mayor's office was a group of them went to, once a month, city council has an open session. Maybe they do it more now, but back then, where the first, 15 minutes of the city council meeting, people can come in and speak about whatever they want to. So a group of people, of indigenous people, went and confronted the city council about like divestment from Chase, and I think it was particularly Chase. So that was, we had been working with them, and somebody sent us this memo that they had gotten back from the mayor, that was, maybe it went to Glenn Morris, I don't know, but saying that Chase had nothing to do with those pipelines. So, we help each other. We shared information, we shared each other's events, and I got to say, Micah was tremendous, and Julia and all the 350 people were amazing in fostering, nurturing those connections with the Native American community. We felt very much in it together.
We've got to do an intentional effort in this valley to reach out to, disproportionately impacted communities, and namely that's like in Western Garfield County, a lot of Spanish-speaking lower income folks that are impacted by fracking, and I think they'd love to be included in this, and could be powerful voices. I just pasted in the chat a link to our donation page. I just wanted to, before more of us jump off, our three panelists are all here volunteering their own time, and so I hope all of you are going to be willing to plug in with us and help us with this campaign. But another way you can support us is by donating whatever you can. And does anyone else have other questions? or points, comments? Jimmy's wondering about smaller towns, if there are smaller municipalities that might also have lessons for us. And I know we have a list. Do any of the three of you know, like I've seen about 46 US municipalities have divested. Does that sound right?
I haven't looked in a while, but the webpage gofossilfree.org/commitments, you can type in municipalities into the search aggregator, and they're all listed there. And often, if you like, you can click on a link. If there's a town or a city that you're interested in connecting with, there might be an ongoing group that you can reach out to.
I'm gonna put that URL.
Yeah, and I just want to make a pitch to everyone that we are launching this effort and really excited, and there's, you know, definitely work to be done, and we need to start connecting with our city councils and kind of evaluating where their investments are and whether we should be targeting them around banking or insurance, and all of that is going to depend on you and what you think is the most valuable in your passions. And so we really, you know, this is going to be a totally grassroots driven campaign by people in the Roaring Fork Valley for our communities to go fossil free and send a real signal to the rest of the state and the country. And so I want to invite everybody to join us. And Will, are you going to pitch the workshop?
Oh my gosh, yes. In third week in September, we're holding a training, climate leadership training to skill up, for all of us to gain the skills for becoming effective organizers. So, you know, tonight's been really informational, but that training, 21st, is that right, Julia?
Yeah, so it's the 21st. It's free to the public, so anybody can attend. We're going to try and get folks from all over the Roaring Fork Valley to come. Our amazing volunteer and Jedi director, Amy Gray, is going to join us and put on an awesome workshop with Will. We're going to cover how to put on a campaign, how to bring in volunteers, how to do all of this really amazing work so that we're successful in whatever campaigns we want to do, you know, even after divestment, to take on the climate crisis here locally. So highly recommend. I have been to many of these workshops and they're always so valuable. So feel free to invite other folks. And we're going to be continuing these discussions around divestment and other climate issues in the Valley. So anybody is welcome and invited into the 350 Roaring Fork team. Will's going to be kind of championing us as our local staff person, helping to plug all of us volunteers in. But anybody is welcome to join. So please invite as many people as you know, because we need a huge movement here. And I'm putting the link to sign up for the climate leadership workshop in the chat right now, but we'll send it out in an email to everyone too.
Brittany, I did not get to your question. Brittany actually was asking, what do we know about the specifics with, say, Aspen, which I can go into a little bit if people want to hang out, but people are also welcome to return to their regular scheduled evenings. I don't know if there's any other. I can just very briefly, Aspen, we've already reached out to, there's a city councilman in Aspen, Skippy Mesereau, who's interested in divestment. He's concerned. He doesn't like to know that like Aspen has investments in fossil fuels. And 350 actually started conversations with him over a year ago, and then things got stalled with COVID. And we reinitiated communication with Aspen, and we've asked for their financial information. And the mayor told us that they want to look into it, but they want to like have an internal conversation first, and they'll let us know when they're ready to move forward.